Happy New Year to everybody out there in podcast land. It is the latest episode of the Fortress of Rock. I am the Maestro, Kevin Crane. As always, glad to have you aboard. Episode 72, taping here December the 30th, 2022, the last Fortress of Rock podcast episode for 2022. Let's get right into it. News of the world. As always, our tribute to Freddie Mercury and Queen leads off the show. We talked last week about Dave Grohl's Hanukkah sessions. Got a few more songs to discuss, a few more of his cover tunes. Of course, this is an annual tradition now, featuring him and his friend, Greg Kurstin. Of course, Greg Kurstin is Jewish. Dave Grohl is not. Bear with me on that for a minute or so, and we'll get back into why that is relevant. But now we're up to 8 of the 9 songs recorded live in Los Angeles earlier in December. The 3 more videos that were released this week include Randy Newman's I Love LA, Rush's The Spirit of Radio, and a cover of a song from the Yeah Yeah Yeahs. And I'm not even going to pretend to know the song, so why bother? Now, over the last couple songs in the latest releases from the Hanukkah sessions, Jack Black, the great Jack Black, jumps in. And of course, you guys know I love Tenacious D. I love Jack Black. He's just awesome. He gets it. Not only is he funny, but he has got a true rock and roll heart. Now, a couple notes that I did not bring up last week when we first started talking about Dave Grohl's Hanukkah sessions is that, number one, I did not realize that these cover songs are all Jewish-themed cover songs. So, of course, Rush, we know Geddy Lee is Jewish. Same with Randy Newman, although he admits that he is not devoutly Jewish. Again, Dave Grohl's not Jewish. I'm not Jewish. But I still think this, especially in this day and age, is a very, very worthwhile project. The profits from anything and everything that they make, Dave Grohl and his friend Greg Kurstin make from these Hanukkah sessions, goes to the Anti-Defamation League. And it's just, of course, you guys know I don't like to get into politics, but we know it's been an ugly few years. Probably could say it's been an ugly 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. But especially for anti-Semitism, it's just been very nasty, very ugly. Of course, we've got people in the media, Whoopi Goldberg, Kyrie Irving in sports, who come to mind with their, blatant ignorance of the Holocaust and their outright hatred for Jewish people. And this all needs to stop, in my opinion. It just all needs to stop. So that's why the Hanukkah sessions are actually a very good cause. And I'm not just talking about anti-Semitism. I'm talking about racism. I'm talking about all of it. But I don't want it to get to the point. It's been like this for years. It has been, and I have a bad feeling it's continued to be like this, where it's jammed down our throats over and over and over again. We see it in the NFL. We hear it from rock stars. Inspire change, be the difference, end hate. I don't need platitudes, and I don't need celebrities who make more money than God telling me to not be hateful. when in many ways, they're the ones that help spread the hatred. They basically say, favor this group over that group. Favor this political party over that political party. So one of the few times I can actually endorse a celebrity cause, the Hanukkah sessions, check them out. Hopefully they get a penny or two every time you play a video on YouTube. Again, there should be at least 8 songs out there on YouTube to check out. Very cool cover songs. And again, Dave Grohl is a rock and roll hero, in my humble opinion. My man, David Lee Roth, is back. He has returned to the podcasting world. The Roth Show, season 1 of David Lee Roth's podcast ended October the 1st of 2019. But all of a sudden, out of the clear blue sky, this past week, season 2 of The Roth Show has popped up. You know I love David Lee Roth for all his faults, for all his goofiness, his borderline insanity. He is my man. So check out The Roth Show if you are a Van Halen fan, as of course you know I am. Not really familiar with Modest Mouse. Not a band that I would normally follow, but sad news. Their drummer, Jeremiah Green, stage 4 cancer. Again, another example of somebody way too young to be suffering to the point where they are on the verge of death. Maybe we should stop spending all our money, our government, pissing our money away on stupid pork projects and funnel even more money than I know we already put a lot into it, but we have got to figure out a way to at least slow down, if not completely cure cancer. And then finally here, wrapping up news of the world at the end of 2022, keeping with the Debbie Downer theme, again, would love to give you more positive stuff like the Hanukkah sessions, but unfortunately, the real world loves to intrude. It has been a bad, bad, bad 2022 for Steven Tyler of Aerosmith. Of course, we've been talking about the fact that he has been in rehab, suffered through some kind of illness at the end of 2022 that forced Aerosmith to cancel, I believe, 8 dates, if not more, on their Vegas residency. And now, right before the end of the year, technically not named in this lawsuit, but there are 50 John Does named in a lawsuit from Julia Holcomb. And by all accounts, evidence points to Steven Tyler being one of those 50 John Does. You might ask, who is Julia Holcomb? If you have read Steven Tyler's 2011 memoir, or you know your rock and roll history, Steven Tyler became the legal guardian of Julia Holcomb when she was 16 and he was 26. Her parents signed over guardianship to Steven Tyler so he could take her out on tour with him and he would not get in trouble or be arrested for taking her over county lines. Now, of course, again, I don't want to get too graphic here. The Fortress is not here to be explicit. No cursing, no swearing, and we're going to keep the sexual innuendo to a bare minimum, but you can kind of connect the dots and figure out what happened on the road. In his memoir, Steven Tyler talks about nearly taking a child bride who was barely able to drive. There was a pregnancy involved, an aborted pregnancy. In the lawsuit, even though I'm getting conflicting information, I don't see how sexual assault and sexual battery can be considered misdemeanors, but again, the lawsuit itself is vague in that it doesn't name, at this point, the John Does involved. This all came about because California recently waived the statute of limitations on crimes involving children. So again, this is a very ugly, potentially devastating lawsuit for Steven Tyler. And the fact that he pretty much admits to most of the allegations in his biography, his autobiography, is very damning. Now, of course, the legal system here in the United States, the wheels grind slowly, as we all know. We'll see how long this takes with the health issues with Steven Tyler. This could almost turn into a Harvey Weinstein type thing where he barely gets to trial. This would be a sad, sad closing chapter for Aerosmith if this actually ends up playing out as it looks like it might, considering that we are in the middle of the hashtag #MeToo movement. And I'm thinking that's a good thing in this case. Again, since Steven Tyler has already admitted most of the charges that are in the lawsuit. Again, I'm not a big political person. I feel strongly about my views, but I do not like to share them on this podcast. In this case, though, the pressure that we are seeing this day and age from female rights groups, the Me Too movement, in this case, as with Harvey Weinstein, look like everything is warranted in terms of going full bore after Steven Tyler. And you can't use the excuse of, oh, it was the 70s, sex and drugs and rock and roll. You can't use that excuse. It doesn't matter if we're talking the 1880s, the 1920s, the 1950s, or the 1970s. Common sense at some point has to prevail, common decency. And again, Steven Tyler, if these allegations are true, should be absolutely ashamed of himself, and he should have to pay it at the minimum restitution, if not serve jail time. That's it for News of the World here on New Year's Eve on the Fortress of Rock. Next up, breakdown, and we are going to start our 2022 recap. This is going to carry us over for the next 3 weeks, the next 3 episodes. So week 1 of our 2022 year in review will begin in breakdown with my pick for my top 5 concerts of the year. So you don't want to miss that. Of course, we've got a couple new songs that we are going to review as well. So stay tuned. Plenty more coming here on this December 30th episode of The Fortress of Rock. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Fortress of Rock podcast with me, the Maestro, Kevin Crane. Of course, that was segment 1, The News of the World, our tribute to Freddie Mercury and Queen, where we look back at the past week in rock and roll and all the news and all the controversies that you deserve to know about. Next up is the heart of the show, the meat and potatoes, breakdown, where we are going to review all the new songs, all the new albums, all the new concert tours, the shows that I've seen personally. Stay tuned for that. Of course, we're now available on Spotify, Anchor, Apple, Stitcher, Castbox, Google, Pocket Cast, and Radio Public, wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Hang out, kids. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back to the Fortress of Rock. I am the Maestro, Kevin Crane. Last episode of 2022, December the 30th. This is episode 72. Time for breakdown, our tribute to the late, great Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. And that being said, I've mentioned this on the show before as we're getting ready to review the year in concerts, how much it breaks my heart that I never got to see Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers live in concert. One of the few bands that I really would have loved to have seen live. I had one chance. I don't want to get into details on why it didn't come together, but suffice it to say, sometimes you got to tell some of your friends to go blow and do things when you want to, how you want to, and not always concede to their whims and their desires. All right, that being said, my wrap up of my year when it comes to concerts, I saw 14 shows in 2022. Most of them good, a few bad or underwhelming. Of course, I ranted about Bon Jovi and how terrible and how disappointing that show was down in Indianapolis at the Pacers basketball arena. But for the most part, as you would expect, if you're seeing as many concerts as I do and you're not getting 90% of them being positive or at least halfway decent, then you're doing something wrong. Maybe you shouldn't be going to see concerts. Because for the most part, these bands, these performers do actually try their best to give you the best possible show. Now, of course, acoustics get in the way sometimes. The fans at the show can be complete and total jackasses and screw things up for you and make an otherwise good show bad, depending on their behavior, whether they've had way too many $15 beers. With that being said, counting down from 5 to 1, here are my 5 favorite concerts that I saw of 2022. Now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to cheat a little bit here. In that, in some respects, in some instances, I will rate the whole show. In other instances, I will only rate the headliner or the opening act because I don't want the other band or bands that they played with to influence my rating, my opinion of that particular group's show. And why do I say that? Because I start off number 5 with Judas Priest at the Wings Event Center in Kalamazoo, Michigan. Queensryche opened for them. Queensryche was subpar, not very good, not the Queensryche of old. Again, I know Jeff Tate is no longer with them, but they seem like they want to really go metal, metal, metal. Their short set did not acknowledge, for the most part, the songs that you and I know. They played Empire, and that was it. Otherwise, it was either new stuff or obscure older material. But cannot argue with the fact that Judas Priest put on yet another great show. Saw them for the first time ever in 2021. This follow-up show, they changed the set list almost completely outside of the encore. But the encore was so awesome the first time around, I wouldn't want them to change it. But they changed the set list completely around for the body of the show from 2021 to 2022. It was fantastic. Rob Halford still sounds great. They got their due finally, coming in the back door, no pun intended, to get into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I still think it's a travesty that they couldn't get voted in the right way. But I'm not going to rant about the Rock Hall of Fame this week. All I'm going to say is Judas Priest, still awesome. Number 5 on my list of the best concerts of 2022. Number 4, a band that I think I love a little bit more than most. They're considered a second-tier band from the grunge era, along with Bush, but most people don't necessarily give them the credit they give to Pearl Jam or Soundgarden or Alice in Chains or Nirvana. That would be Stone Temple Pilots. Now we know Scott Weiland has passed. New lead singer here for the last few years with STP, and he is a perfect replacement for Scott Weiland. And their show they put on at Four Winds Field in South Bend, Indiana was great. Set list was near perfect. Their performance was near perfect. Second time I've seen STP, and again, just like Judas Priest, both times they have been stellar. So Stone Temple Pilots are my 4th best show of 2022. Now, 3rd on my list, again, this is where I'm throwing the curveball in, like I did with Judas Priest, and I could almost say the same thing with STP because I am dismissing Everclear, who opened for Stone Temple Pilots. They unfortunately are showing their age. They're showing some wear and tear from their glory days when I'd seen them, and I love them. But now we're going to flip things around a little bit. Instead of praising the headliner and the headliner only, we're going to praise the opening act instead of the headliner. My third best concert of 2022 is Rival Sons, once again at Wings Event Center in Kalamazoo, Michigan. Now, Rival Sons opened for Greta Van Fleet, who for the most part were fairly underwhelming. Not nearly as bad as Bon Jovi, but I had known a little tiny bit about Rival Sons, but not much. And they put on 40 minutes, 45 minutes, somewhere in there, of an unbelievable, tight, nasty blues, southern rock, heavy show that I just was enamored with. I have been listening to their albums nonstop ever since. Pressure and Time. New album coming out here in a couple months in 2023. We'll be reviewing that. We've talked about the brand new single they've got out, Nobody Wants to Die, which is fantastic. But Rival Sons, and this is what's so great about music, what's so great about rock and roll, is you can still dig up, find, discover great new bands if you just give them a chance. Jump out of your comfort zone every once in a while. And believe me, people accuse me of not being willing to jump out of my music comfort zone. But with Rival Sons, I did, and I am so happy I did. My new favorite band. Qualifying that, of course, it's not like Van Halen or any of the classics, but in terms of newer bands, I love Rival Sons. They were great in concert. And again, concerts will influence you. This is why sometimes we don't want to go see just the greatest hits. We want to hear new music. Some of us do. We're in the minority. I get it. But some of us want to hear new stuff, not only from the opening band, but from the bands that we know and love. But Rival Sons, opening for Greta Van Fleet, my third favorite concert of 2022. Second best show of 2022 at Pierre's in Fort Wayne, Indiana, was the double bill, the co-headlining tour of Dirty Honey and Mammoth WVH. Now, I'd gotten to see Wolfgang Van Halen and Mammoth WVH in 2021, opening for Guns N' Roses. But of course, completely different. A 180 turn from that show to this show early this year at Pierre's. Whereas it seemed like for the GNR show, we were half a mile away in the fourth deck, I believe, at Lucas Oil Stadium in Indianapolis in 2021. Here at Pierre's, we were maybe 20 feet away from Wolfgang Van Halen and the band, maybe 25. Much more intimate setting. And Dirty Honey, of course, another band trying to bring back that old school rock and roll feel, similar to Rival Sons in that they have a little bit of a southern rock flavor to them, a little bit of blues, but they also like to incorporate that harder edge. Great, phenomenal double bill. Dirty Honey and Mammoth WVH, my second favorite concert of 2022. My top show for the year. And again, a lot of you are going to go, who, what, who? If you've been listening to The Fortress here for a while, you know this is one of my favorite bands that not many people out there know about. And it's a shame because they have been around for basically almost 2 decades. Roger Clyne and the Peacemakers, at the Hi-Fi in Indianapolis, Indiana. That is my favorite show of 2022. I've seen Roger Clyne and the Peacemakers a couple times before. I've seen them at Mr. G's in Osceola, Indiana. I've seen them at Bell's up in Kalamazoo, Michigan. Hoping to see them up at Bell's again in 2023. I don't know how I can describe the Peacemakers in a way that will convince you if you haven't listened to them after all the times here over the past year and a half that I've tried to sell you on this band. I don't know what else I can do or what else I can say. Roger Clyne, of course, was one of the key members of the Refreshments, who put out two phenomenal albums, Fizzy Fuzzy, Big and Buzzy, and The Bottle and Fresh Horses. Everybody knows the song Bandidos, with the great classic line, everyone knows the world is full of stupid people. But the Refreshments broke up after those two albums, and Roger Clyne went off on his own and formed his own band, the Peacemakers. Now they've got about 9 or 10 albums out. Again, like I said, they've been around quite a while. They are another great mix, just like Dirty Honey, just like Rival Sons. They mix genres. And the best bands know how to jump from style to style. Roger Clyne might be a little bit more country heavy than those other bands I mentioned, but they also know how to put a hard edge on, how to rock. And Roger Clyne is one of the greatest lyricists I have ever heard. His writing is funny, poignant, poetic. His performances as a lead man, as a front man for the Peacemakers, couldn't be more likable, couldn't be more personable. He's the anti-Billy Joe Armstrong. He's not going to scream and yell about politics at you. In a way, it's almost a little bit hippy-dippy, Grateful Dead-ish, and he's trying to make a community among his fans, calling us all the peacemakers. But the energy and the passion, the tight songwriting, the live show is just as good as it gets without all the pomp and circumstance. It's not a Kiss show, okay? There's no blood spewing, levitating, drum kits. It is just straight on, 100% great rock and roll, influenced, again, a little bit country. They come from the Southwest, so you can hear a little bit of the Tex-Mex in their music. I just can't tell you how much I love Roger Clyne and the Peacemakers, and they never disappoint. 2022, they were dead on perfect. They are my top concert of the year, Roger Clyne and the Peacemakers. Other shows I saw, just to rattle off a few, because, like I said, again, 90% of the shows that I go to see are pretty good. Of course, finally got to see the Doobie Brothers after the COVID delays. Finally got to see Kansas for the first time at the Elkhart County Fair. Saw Jackal again. The family reunion was back on for the first time in 3 years after, again, COVID. Steel Panthers, saw them again for the second time in 2 years. Saw the stadium tour, of course, Motley Crue, Def Leppard, Poison, and Joan Jett. Sound issues kind of ruined that one. George Thorogood and Sammy Hagar, how can you go wrong with that? Finally, again, like the Doobie Brothers, got to see Billy Joel at Notre Dame Stadium. Great show, delayed by years because of COVID. And then, of course, the great triple bill, the 80s triple bill at Pierre's, Faster Pussycat, LA Guns, and Tom Kiefer of Cinderella. So there you go. There is my recap of the top 5 concerts of 2022, part 1 of my 3-part 2022 year in review. We'll discuss a little bit more about that when we get to the end and wrap it up. Now, we do have 2 songs to review this week, new releases. One is an older, lost track, and one is a brand new song from, again, another band like Roger Clyne that you probably have not heard of, but rock and roll veterans still putting out great music. First up, though, Quiet Riot, I Can't Hold On. This is similar in a way to Paris Blues from The Doors that we reviewed a few weeks back. A lost track that was found, incomplete. Rudy Sarzo, bass player for Quiet Riot, in their classic lineup, of course, the Metal Health lineup, pieced it back together again. Of course, we have lost lead singer Kevin DuBrow and drummer Frankie Banali. So in a way, I Can't Hold On is very poignant. If you see the video on YouTube, it's a tribute basically to DuBrow and Vanali. I hate to be callous in terms of it. As a standalone song, it's okay. I don't think it's great. It's more of a power ballad. So you're not going to bang your head to this one. And again, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but I've told you, it's very hard for me when it comes to power ballads. It's very hard for me to appreciate or like a power ballad. And unfortunately, I Can't Hold On is not an exception to the rule, but it's not terrible. It's not like Open Arms from Journey. It's not abysmally puke-inducing awful. It's good. It's solid. But on the other side of the coin, it's not every rose has its thorn either. It's decent. You can kind of understand why it didn't show up on their Rehab album. But at the same time, I love to hear this stuff. It's better for it to be out there than for it to just be buried in somebody's archives. Are you listening to me, Wolfgang Van Halen, Alex Van Halen? It's better to put the stuff out than to leave it rotting away somewhere where we can't experience it. Even if it brings joy to one person out there, it was worth the time, the effort to put the song out. So again, Quiet Riot's I Can't Hold On. Not bad, but not great. Finally, to finish up Breakdown, new song from the Winery Dogs. Their 3rd album is coming out in 2023. The Winery Dogs are a trio that consists of Richie Kotzen, who had a brief stint in Poison when Bret Michaels stepped away. Billy Sheehan, bass player, of course, from Mr. Big and the Eat 'em and Smile era David Lee Roth band. And Mike Portnoy, drummer of Dream Theater. Now, I have their first 2 albums. They are really good, solid rock and roll. And the first single off their upcoming third album is Xanadu, and it is no exception. Xanadu is another great song from the Winery Dogs. Richie Kotzen's guitar playing is as good as it's always been. It's solid. I find him a little bit weak on vocals. Not egregiously bad, just not. Let's put it this way: he's not a Chris Cornell, he's not a Jim Morrison, but the rest of the band, the trio, they make up for it. They're tight. The songwriting is good. The guitar playing, as I mentioned, is good. Check out Xanadu from the Winery Dogs. I recommend it. Down the road, of course, here on the Fortress of Rock, we will review the Winery Dogs' third album, creatively titled 3. So that'll do it for Breakdown here. Segment 2 of the Fortress of Rock is done. Segment 3, of course, coming up. Don't drink and drive on New Year's Eve, kids. Be safe, be responsible. But I am going to go out, get in the DeLorean, the rock and roll time machine, travel back, anniversaries and birthdays, classic moments in rock and roll history. It is time for I Want to Go Back after a brief promo break. Lots to talk about. Dominated by the Monkees. Stay tuned. I will be right back. All right, now that we've looked at the current state of music in our breakdown segment, it is time to climb into the DeLorean and travel back in time to look back at moments in rock and roll history, birthdays, deaths, anniversaries of song and album releases. It is time for I Want to Go Back, our tribute to Eddie Money. Stay tuned. And as always, we're on Spotify, Anchor, Apple, Stitcher, Castbox, Google, Pocket Cast, and Radio Public, anywhere where you listen to your favorite podcasts. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Fortress of Rock. Yes, it is that time. It is that time to get the DeLorean, the rock and roll DeLorean, fired up to 1.21 gigawatts. It's time to head back in rock and roll history for birthdays, anniversaries, classic moments, album releases, the things that influenced us, the things that created the best songs, the best concerts, the best moments in rock history. But first, it's time to take care of a little business, as it always is at this point in the Fortress of Rock. First and foremost, of course, you have found us somewhere if you're listening to the sound of my voice, but you have options. Wherever you might have found us, thank you for that. But keep in mind, you can find us on Spotify, Anchor, Google, Radio Public, Pocket Casts, Apple, Overcast, Castbox, Stitcher, Amazon Music, as well as Audible. We also have our Facebook page. Check that out. We're right in the middle of our latest weekend rock project. Having a little New Year's Eve debauchery fun with this one, where we are asking if you lost a bet, maybe had a few too many to drink at a New Year's Eve party. You lost the bet. You lost the dare. You have to get 3 rock and roll stars' faces tattooed on your back. What 3 rock and roll stars would you pick? Not 4, not 2, 3. Try to make it a little more difficult. So you can't get a full band, for the most part, tattooed on your back. Of course, I would have gone with, if I could have gone with 4, I would have gone with classic era Van Halen. I would have just taken the back picture from Women and Children first and had that tattooed on my back. That would have covered it, but that would have been 4. So unless you're in love with a trio, the Police, maybe, 3 and 3 only. Rock and roll stars on your back. Who would you have tattooed on your back? Then, of course, New Music Sunday is coming up, where each and every week we try to give you a YouTube video showcasing some of the best in new rock and roll. I have a feeling that this week we just talked about the Winery Dogs and their new song, Xanadu. I'm about 99% sure that that will be your new music video for Sunday on our Facebook page. Now, of course, one last little bit of news and business to take care of. When it comes to our news, when it comes to the headlines that we discuss, the historic moments here in I Want to Go Back, our tribute to the late, great Eddie Money, we do have sources. I can't pluck all of this out of my head, despite the fact that I probably have too much useless pop culture information floating around up there. I do have to go to sources to get ideas for a lot of these stories, especially the ones in News of the World and here in I Want to Go Back. My 3 main sources are ultimateclassicrock.com, thisdayinmusic.com, and of course the Van Halen News Desk. But again, the core ideas come from them. The opinions are mine and mine alone. All right, let's start off here as we travel back in time. Let's do anniversaries first. Unfortunately, for the most part, sad stuff. December the 30th of 2020, just a few years ago, Alto Reed died. You might be saying, who's Alto Reed? Well, given the name, I don't think it would shock you to know that he was the saxophone player for Bob Seger's Silver Bullet Band. Of course, the unbelievable saxophone on Turn the Page. Prominent member of the Silver Bullet Band. Just a few years ago, Alto Reed passed away. We go back to December the 30th of 2002. Unfortunately, another death, in this case, the funeral for the Clash's Joe Strummer. Now, I've said in the past here, I'm not a huge fan of the Clash. There are a lot of people who are borderline fanatics when it comes to the Clash. I never really got it. They were okay at times. A couple songs of theirs that I really, really love. Of course, Should I Stay or Should I Go? Train in Vain is the best. Train in Vain is just a phenomenal song. Rock the Casbah, I don't know if I've just heard it too much. I can give or take it nowadays. But of course, that's not really who the Clash was. the most revered, the better material of theirs is the stuff that you didn't hear on the radio. Again, kind of a critic's darling in a lot of respects. I respect the Clash. I do. We're not getting into Neil Young or Eric Clapton, Bob Dylan territory here. I don't dislike the Clash. They're fine. I just never understood the legendary status that they achieved. December the 30th of 1998, Johnny Moore passed away. You might be asking, who is Johnny Moore? And I wouldn't blame you because, number one, we're going way back in time. But one of the greatest songs of the early years of rock and roll was The Drifters, Under the Boardwalk. Johnny Moore was the lead singer at the time for The Drifters. Yes, that is his voice you hear on that magnificent, beautiful song, Under the Boardwalk. Then finally, to wrap up our anniversaries, sad day for me personally because as a Monkees fan, this day, December the 30th, very bittersweet for multiple reasons. Number one, December the 30th, 1969, Peter Tork officially quit the Monkees. Supposedly bought out his contract, basically wiping out his finances, making him stone cold broke. Of course, we've talked about a lot of the different things in the past, the dynamics of the Monkees. Didn't get the respect they deserve, still don't get the respect they deserve. Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Initially start off as a TV band made for TV, then wanted to play their own instruments, become a legitimate band, which they did. But unfortunately, the core four members could never quite get together. Two here, three here, another three. It was all a mismatch, a mixture of the original four, but never the four together, which is an absolute shame. All right, moving on to birthdays, December the 30th. We have got some big, big birthdays to discuss. We're going all the way back now to December the 30th of 1947. Somebody who I personally love, admire, and respect for not only fronting one of the favorite bands that I had growing up, but his producing, engineering of revivals for legends. I'm talking about the great Jeff Lynne. Of course, you know him as the leader of Electric Light Orchestra, ELO, and that on its own warrants mention and praise. Jeff Lynne's 75 years old today, but beyond ELO, and I've talked about that recently, how much I loved ELO growing up. I don't think we talked enough about what happened in his career outside of ELO and the respect and the admiration and the influence that he had. He was responsible in many ways. I'm not saying completely and totally. I'm not one of those people. There's always multiple people involved in a success story, but it would be ridiculous for me not to at least give him the lion's share of the credit for George Harrison's career resurgence. You can hear Jeff Lynne's influence. It's blatant in a lot of these songs we're going to talk about here over the next few minutes. He had a particular style, carried it over from ELO, and you could hear it in George Harrison when he came back into the limelight. Got My Mind Set on You. You can hear Jeff Lynne's influence on that song, as well as Tom Petty going out on his own, Free Fallin', Full Moon Fever, that album, Jeff Lynne, again, his fingerprints are all over it. And then, of course, we bring George Harrison and Tom Petty in with Jeff Lynne, and we talk about the two stellar albums from the supergroup, the Traveling Wilburys. Two fantastic albums, of course, marred by tragedy. Roy Orbison, one of the original Wilburys, passed away as they were setting up the second album. Of course, Bob Dylan and Jeff Lynne, the only two surviving members of the Traveling Wilburys. But I just want to put this out there, and you can disagree with me, you can agree with me. Jeff Lynne is vastly underrated when it comes to being one of the most influential forces in rock and roll history. When you think about everything he did outside, not only with his band ELO, but outside of ELO, Jeff Lynne is a legend to me. I mean, he is up there. Might not make Mount Rushmore. That would be pretty tough to do, but he doesn't get enough credit for how important he has been to the sound of rock and roll, especially from the 70s through the 80s, even into the 90s. Happy birthday to the great Jeff Lynne. Now we go back to our Monkees theme. And as I said, this is a very bittersweet day for me. Mentioned earlier about Peter Tork on this day quitting the Monkees. Birthdays shouldn't be bittersweet, but in this case they are. I never realized, I say this all the time, by the way, I learned something new every week doing this podcast, and I hope you do too. I always find out or dig up some new nugget or tidbit that I never knew about before when it came to the bands, the artists, the performers that I love. And today was one of those days. I did not realize that December the 30th was the birthday for not only Davy Jones, but also Michael Nesmith. Two of the four Monkees share today, as we tape, this particular birthday. Now, the sad part of this is, of course, both Davy Jones and Michael Nesmith have passed away. Davy Jones was born on this day in 1945, Michael Nesmith in 1942. In many ways, they were polar opposites when it came to the style. And that was the great thing about the Monkees. You could basically say all four members of the Monkees were such different personalities. And that could be what made them so intriguing to me and so fascinating. And again, vastly underrated. Do not get the credit they deserve. Lucky to see Davy Jones at least live with Peter Tork and Mickey Dolenz about a year before he died. Never got to see Michael Nesmith with the Monkees, though. And again, I alluded to this earlier. They never really were able to get all four founding members or all four original members back together. It was always a composite. But I miss them. I miss them so much. It'll never be like Eddie Van Halen to me. Losing him was devastating to me, but for the sheer joy that I got as a child growing up watching the Monkees, and then the Monkees being the first concert I ever got to see with my daughter, a day like this should be a day to celebrate because of it being birthdays, but it just makes me realize they're gone. So happy birthday and rest in peace to Davy Jones and Michael Nesmith. Going back to December the 30th of 1937, Paul Stuckey, who you would know him better as part of Peter, Paul, and Mary. Yes, we're going a little bit hippie on you here, a little bit love and peace. But again, we talked about earlier Johnny Moore and his great song with the Drifters, Under the Boardwalk. Sometimes just one song can make an artist or a performer or a group great. Now, I know Peter, Paul, and Mary had multiple hits, a lot of them singing Bob Dylan songs. And again, it just proves my point. I've said this over and over again about Bob Dylan. His songs are so much better when somebody else sings them. But to me, the song that defines Peter, Paul, and Mary is the great, great song, Leaving on a Jet Plane. Just that line, that chorus, it fulfills the nomad's heart. The people like me who always want to wander. Now, I'm not a traveler, so in a way, I'm being a hypocrite, but I've always wanted to just have that freedom. When things get tough, when things get bad, you just want to pack a bag, and go and never come back. Leave all the material possessions behind, leave all the worries, leave all the troubles behind. Now, of course, responsible adults like you and I don't do that. But it's always in the back of your head. Don't tell me it's not. So the great line, I'm leaving on a jet plane, don't know if I'll be back again, is just, it resonates with me. It resonates with me, and I've always loved it. Going back to December the 30th of 1934, the great Del Shannon and the classic song, Runaway. Of course, tragically, Del Shannon took his own life decades ago. I remember, the thing that I remember the most is Tom Petty and how Tom Petty loved Del Shannon. Runaway, of course, before my time. I know the song. I appreciate the song. It's a fine song, great song, but the influence that I heard over the years that Del Shannon had on people that I considered my musical influences, Tom Petty, again, standing out in that respect. Del Shannon, born on this day in 1934. And finally, speaking of influences, Speaking of somebody who is always mentioned over and over, time and time again, as one of the most influential people in music history, born on December the 30th, 1928, the great, the awesome Bo Diddley. So there you go, kids. December the 30th, very, very important day in rock history for multiple reasons. Interesting, fun stuff to discuss with you. That will wrap up. I want to go back for another week, but we're not quite done yet. A couple more minutes here after the last promo break. We'll talk about some of the things we will review in 2023. So hang out for just a few more minutes with me, and then we'll let you get on to your New Year's Eve festivities. I'll be right back. Well, we hope you enjoyed our trip back in time, looking back at the anniversaries, the classic moments in rock and roll history. But of course, the DeLorean works both ways. So now we have to move forward. The last segment here, as always, on the Fortress of Rock with me, the Maestro Kevin Crane. Spotify, Anchor, Apple, Stitcher, Castbox, Google, Pocket Casts, Radio Public, wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. It's all about the future. What's coming out here in the next month or two? What songs? What albums? What concert tours? That's why we call it Wrap It Up. Thanks to the fabulous Thunderbirds. Thanks to you for hanging out. Here comes our final segment. All right, everybody, time to wrap it up. Segment 4, our tribute to the fabulous Thunderbirds. Hope you enjoyed the last Fortress of Rock episode for 2022. Of course, we will be back with episode 73 next Friday night. As we mentioned earlier, it is time to wrap up 2022. We started here this week with our top 5 concerts of the year. Next week, you will get our top 5 songs of 2022. The year in review continues, and then after that, of course, the final chapter in our year in review, the big one, the top 5 albums of 2022, coming in a couple weeks here on the Fortress of Rock. Unfortunately, wintertime, not a lot of concerts to review. We're about 7 weeks out, 6-7 weeks out from our next show, which will be Alter Bridge and Mammoth WVH in February from the Murat in Indianapolis. In terms of new music, again, it's going to be a little bit thin for a while, but we'll make do. We'll figure it out. I mentioned last week, still working through that Mammoth Tom Petty set that has been released here recently, live at the Fillmore 1987. We mentioned there's a new Nickelback song out there called Unredeemable. We'll have that for you next week on the Fortress of Rock. And yes, I know I've been saying this for the last month and a half. I will finally get to the Vai Gash songs, Steve Vai, going back to some lost recordings from the early 90s. The 2 songs out right now are Busted and In the Wind, and I promise you I will review them. I know, procrastination, it's a wonderful thing. Part of the thing is, I've got some other podcasts I do. So when it comes to reviews, I try to review the same things on this show that I do in much less detail on other shows, other podcasts. Um, Sports Frenzy 2.0, which I do with my best friend Dave. Sports Frenzy is the mothership. We've been doing that for 30 years on and off through cable access TV and YouTube and now podcasting. And then, of course, I have a podcast with my daughter called X2Z where we talk about music a little bit. So the reviews I do in breakdown, for you guys, I give you a little more detail, going a little more in depth than I do on those other podcasts. But I try to save a little bit of time by reviewing the same things across all of those podcasts. So I know we're going to have Nickelback next week because we're doing that on Sports Frenzy as well. Vi and Gash is something that I'm doing on my own, so that's why it's taking a little bit longer to get around to that. But that's going to do it for the Fortress of Rock here on December the 30th, 2022. I hope you enjoyed episode 72. Always have fun talking about rock and roll. Always fun to look back at the year. The concerts, of course, a little bit easier to do considering there were just over a dozen to look back at. Now things get a little bit more difficult with picking through all the songs of the year, picking through all the albums of the year. So while I'm watching football this weekend, while you guys are out there partying it up, be safe, be careful. I'm too old to partake in amateur night anymore. I had my fun when I was younger. I did my time, took my risks, took my gambles. I wish you nothing but safety, health this weekend and into 2023. Just be responsible. I am not trying to lecture you. I'm not trying to be the get off my lawn old man, but voice of experience, okay? I didn't get into that much trouble on New Year's Eve, but then again, I got lucky and there weren't people looking to see what I did sometimes on New Year's Eve. Or I could have gotten in a lot of trouble and ended up in a jail cell. I don't want you to do that. Be safe, be responsible, be careful because it's not just you. You got to worry about all the other people out there. If you're stone cold sober, but you're going to a party to hang out with your friends, absolutely nothing wrong with that. But of course, you've got to worry about every other car on the road on amateur night. So please take care of yourself. Come back and listen next Friday night. More great stories, reviews, the world of rock and roll. I am the Maestro, Kevin Crane. Have a great, happy, healthy New Year's. We'll talk to you next Friday.